Skyrim has fallen into disarray after the assassination of High King Logrolf, which left his daughter Freydis in charge of eastern Skyrim, ruling from Windhelm, and Jarls Svarter in charge of the west, ruling from Solitude. Of course, these events are huge in Skyrim's history, as the east-west divide would not be solved until the crowning of Yoren the Skald King some 150 years later. That is a very long time to be in civil war, and in that time, the identity of Skyrim is sure to have been heavily impacted. The Nords love their drama, poetry, and memory of such events through romanticized reinterpretations, but in reality, 150 years of civil war is certain to have been full of horrible, unspeakable events. The little people of Skyrim, those people left to the margins of history, will never be remembered in the songs. The giants, on the other hand, they remember this history. Although barely seen as sentient creatures by much of Skyrim, the giants are the natives of this land, and some say they too are descendants of the old Atmorans in much the same way as the Nords. With an inscrutable language and a belief in ancient animalistic forces, especially that of the Mammoth, the giants are a culture and people that have sat out most of Skyrim's conflicts. Some would say that's because they lack the intellect to even understand what's going on. Some giants are bitter about that perception, sending travelers flying through the skies with their clubs in rage when they can, and other giants just try to get by. But even those that keep to themselves can find their toes too valuable a prize to be left alone. The giant community of Vitistadr is under constant threat from the nearby Nords. Most giants see the Nords as a nuisance, but one man believed that in reality, giants had a place in society if they could just prove their value to the Nords. To be seen as equals would take work, even if the need to fight for equality was itself an injustice. This is Ysgramor, no relation, Thiefcatcher, a name he took believing that it would earn him inherent trust among the Nords. Every Nord knows Ysgramor, and most of them hate thieves, so how could they possibly be mean to Ysgramor Thiefcatcher? What's his goal? Well, it's simply to help create a world where giants are not hated. He intends to do that by becoming a heroic adventurer, the likes of which might enter the great poems of Skyrim skalds one day. Can Ysgramor carve out a place for the giants in Skyrim, or will he be slain and turned into alchemical ingredients like so many before him? Let's see. Ysgramor started his career as an adventurer in Vitistadr itself, taking on jobs from his local giant community to get some experience. He was joined by his good friends Hakra and Burel, who saw this as a pretty good opportunity to make some money. Ysgramor has more noble intentions though, hoping to genuinely be of service to Skyrim. The three giants heard news that the local Nords were short-handed and needed a group of mercenaries to guard some dark elf emissaries on their way back to Morrowind. Naturally, Ysgramor offered his services. Now, the very idea of giants guarding people instead of eating them seemed, shall we say, unlikely to the Nordic people, and yet they didn't really care much for the lives of some dark elf emissaries, so working at a heavy discount, Ysgramor was given the job. With a bow and a thank you, Ysgramor departed Vitistadr to travel to Bon Malur. Not a single threat so much as approached them, given the general fear of giants in this world. What an excellent job Ysgramor did protecting these envoys. They were sweating and cowering most of the trip, but they made it to Bon Malur in safety as promised. Ysgramor returned home, but along the way came across a dragon burial mound. He's seen them before, but he took the opportunity to sit and consider the history of this land. Skyrim is where mankind first came to Tamriel, and the legendary empire of Tamriel was founded by a man, Riman. Riman would later ascend to godhood, but he was, at one point, just a man, the very same as Ysgramor. Maybe one day, he too can be an important figure in history, but best not to get too uppity. He moved on from his contemplations, ready to meet with the Nord that hired him. An utterly flabbergasted Nord Lendman gave Ysgramor his pay, after which Ysgramor asked him if there's any other work available. Naturally, this Nord did not speak Giantish, and soon ran away, believing that perhaps he'd soon be a meal. Ysgramor will have to learn the local Nordic language if he wants to conduct business properly. Nonetheless, he heard of more emissary escorting work, which would this time be taking him to Solitude. Ysgramor took a longer route, passing through the various cities of Skyrim in the hopes of advertising himself and his services to the people. When he arrived in Windhelm, though, most of the city's inhabitants weren't outside of their houses to see him. For whatever reason, they'd all decided to get inside as quickly as possible once he approached. An unfortunate missed opportunity for some free advertising, Ysgramor thought, as he moved on to Winterhold, Dawnstar, Morthal, and eventually Solitude. He dropped off the emissary at Solitude, and then he took a boat back to Vitistad to collect his pay. From here, he continued this pattern of escorting emissaries until he had amassed quite a trove of gold, some of which he reinvested into his camp, and some of which he would spend on a great party back home. He's looking to recruit more giants for his group so that he could take on fiercer jobs than just protection. He'd meet the likes of Huamyar Grimfist and Halia Shortaxe, among others. He would also use the party as a chance to show off some of his skills. He won a competition with Chiefess Mogra to shoot an apple with a bow. Turns out, Ysgramor has talent as a performer too. The party came to an end and Ysgramor once more began his search for work. Proper work. Winter, it turns out, is a great opportunity to find jobs, given the regular mercenaries of the land are busy freezing. Ysgramor found work protecting the innocent, which will certainly make waves in Nord society. After guarding the people of Mistwatch for a few months, he moved on to perform in a play in Alto, which was a strange job, but again one which will spread his reputation far and wide, surely. Unfortunately, his role was to be a man-eating monster in the play, but he went for it nonetheless. After giving the performance of a lifetime, Ysgramor would obtain the epithet The Jolly. He's a happy, friendly giant, and his reputation is indeed spreading. He was even invited to Narzulbur to participate in a grand tournament hosted by a local orc. Defying all expectations, this orc hosted a set of board games as the event for today, and if Ysgramor can win, he could even prove his intelligence to the Nords. While waiting for the games to begin, Ysgramor spotted a third moon in the sky, a sign of good things to come, and he knew better than ever that his victory was imminent. His first opponent was a Reekling named Zumagik, who quickly conceded after realizing she'd thrown the game from the beginning. Next, he was up against Hungum Hairy Breeches, who really gave it his all, but still lost to Ysgramor's great mind. His final opponent would surely be the toughest of them all, Chief Burzgreg. Once the match began, Ysgramor said good luck to his opponent, but once again, the language barrier proved a problem, as the orc chief's skin whitened at the sound. Did he take it as a threat? Burzgreg soon made some horrible moves on the board, and swiftly was defeated. Ysgramor, realizing he'd won, snapped from his focus, and realized that the crowd was not cheering, but laughing. While the players in this tournament took it very seriously, the audience was mostly Nords and Elves that all saw this as one big farce. Ysgramor had played against a Reekling, a Giant, and an Orc, none of whom particularly commanded respect in the Nord world. He'd won, but it was for an audience that only saw him as a joke. He struggled to keep his temper in check, but the cash prize for winning was a nice consolation for him at least. He even won a little ring, albeit he could never possibly put such a tiny thing on his finger. After the game, one of the attendees approached him with some apprehension and told Ysgramor that the King of Whiterun would like to meet him, and that he should make his way to Dragon's Reach as soon as possible. This is it. Surely now, with the King's interest, Ysgramor can get somewhere. He thanked the man and prepared to travel west. Whiterun is ruled by Shurvar II of Whiterun, a handsome young Nord descended from the Atmoran line of Valder, who is one of Ysgramor's 500 companions. Valder himself was slain by a giant, according to legend. Nonetheless, Shurvar invited Ysgramor to Dragon's Reach and asked him to serve the people of his kingdom. Shurvar is stuck between eastern and western Skyrim, which both want to conquer his kingdom, and it seems like the king, running out of options, is willing to work with even the maligned giants to keep his land alive. Ysgramor engaged in various jobs, from saving damsels in distress to hunting down bandits and brigands. Increasingly, he was offered work that would involve fighting in wars, but Ysgramor always turned them down. He's no mercenary. He felt that the politics of Skyrim and the wars he could fight would not be suitable to his purpose of helping the perception of giants in this world. For every friend that he could make in war, he'd be making an enemy. He spent some time in Whiterun, but on account of his unwillingness to fight for King Shurvar, Ysgramor was eventually told to leave, as his services were no longer in demand. The king, it turned out, only really wanted the giants around so he could exploit them on the battlefield. Ysgramor, dejected, traveled south to Falkreath, ruled by the orc Yeshnag, who had lots of work for him. The giant spent most of his time in the south training the orcish knights that might later go on to fight the very Nords he'd just helped. While morally ambiguous for sure, Ysgramor didn't quite think of the later purpose of training these knights. He instead considered it to be a sort of play. The orcs did enjoy sparring with him, although none could defeat him, of course. Ysgramor is enjoying this more adventurous lifestyle and so quickly set out to Markarth. Now, the ongoing war between the Reachmen and the Nords created lots of opportunities for work protecting the little people. Whether Nord or Reachmen, Ysgramor worked to protect the innocent and train local communities on how to protect themselves. Normally, giants would be feared around here, and indeed, Ysgramor would always be looked at with some trepidation, but increasingly the local communities here felt a bit normal around him. One giant in his group would never be enough to solve the differences between the Nords and the Reachmen, but Ysgramor felt satisfied he'd done some good at least, and departed to Rorikstead, looking to gather himself for a little while. He'd made a lot of money for his work, and he'd surely given the giants a better name. But he often thought of home in Wittestad. Maybe the local Nords were getting along better with his people over there. He sent a friend to go to the settlement at Wittestad and check on the people there, then to return to Rorikstead and report back. It'll take a while for the messenger to get there and come back, so Ysgramor settled in and continued doing tidbits of work here and there. After a few months of waiting, grave news reached Ysgramor. His friend returned with sad news that the Nords had come through and cleared out the giants from their homes. They hadn't totally annihilated them, thankfully, but instead sent them away from their homes, claiming Wittestad for the Nords. The High Queen, Freydis, herself had apparently decreed that giant settlements were to be reclaimed for the Nords to support the war effort against the Pretenders of Solitude. This was, to put it lightly, a great betrayal to Ysgramor. He had hoped that good behavior would create a better world, but then he remembered the Nords laughing at him when he won the tournament in Narzulbur. He remembered the King of Whiterun, who only wanted him for his ability to fight wars. He remembered that Nords don't live very long compared to giants, and that ultimately their tempers were even shorter than their memories. Well, if the giants will always be pariahs, then maybe they should embrace that a little, and so Ysgramor announced to his camp that they'd be taking on more mercenary roles from here. If the world expects them to fight, then they will fight, and they will be damn good at it. He joined his first war. Wulfgar Doomsayer of Hjalvale employed the giants to fight against the Jarl Hjorta of Hjalmarch. He ambushed the Hjalmarchers at the Battle of the Orotheim Mountains, and absolutely slaughtered them. The mammoths and giants in his employ are not battle-hardened by any means, but they don't need to be. By their very size, and some might say their nature, the giants had no problem winning. This was demonstrated once again at the battles of Corvella and Chilblain, where hundreds of Nords were flattened. Ysgramor didn't feel good about it, but the cheers from the Nord army trailing behind him were at least to some extent gratifying. The war ended in Hearthfire of 455 with a massive victory for Wulfgar and the giants. The great success of this campaign would lead only to more, despite Ysgramor's misgivings. Before getting into more wars, Ysgramor joined another tournament, this time hosted by Nords in Carthald. It's a wrestling tournament, and, well, the fact that Ysgramor could even enter was a bit strange. How could any creature possibly even try to wrestle him, let alone try to win? Obviously, Ysgramor put every combatant into the dirt and walked away with some money and fame. He then joined a war against some Reachmen, serving yet more Nords. He's a tool now, an instrument of war. He knows it's wrong to make war, and yet he is only being rewarded for it. Some of his fellow giants feel he has strayed from the Mammoth's path, but ultimately, neither Ysgramor nor most of his followers were particularly zealous. He continued on the warpath, annihilating many foes. Ysgramor sat in his camp in First Seed 464, having spent now decades on the road. He doesn't know how to read or write, so he didn't record his memories, but he went over them, deriving what lessons he could. He'd fought for kings, jarls, lendmen, and barons. He'd fought for and against orcs, reachmen, Nords, whoever paid well. He's a rich mercenary now, with a fearsome reputation, but ultimately, what's this all for? To peoples like the Nords and orcs, might makes right, and although the giants are mighty, they don't share such a philosophy. Might certainly doesn't make right, but maybe it can set things right. Maybe the giants ought to stand up for themselves and conduct an uprising of war to end giant oppression. The various lords of Skyrim operate on a system of war. A monarch rules, and that monarch has power according to what the army can provide them. That monarch then also has a family, and that family continues to rule until the day their army can no longer defend them. If it worked for the Nords, maybe it'll work for Ysgramor. He got married to his best friend, Hilvira, who he'd gotten to know well in all these years on the road. The two will, in good time, produce a long lineage of giant kings and queens. Some of the local Nords heard of this marriage. Many of them didn't even know giants conducted marriages. Nonetheless, Ysgramor the Giant is something of a household name across Skyrim by now, and on account of that, the story of him and his army afforded him a new reputation as a wandering hero, at least among the giants. Among the Nords, he was a reviled monster, and parents warned that bad children would be eaten in the night by Ysgramor and his giantess wife. From the bones of those he slew, Ysgramor fashioned a kingly suit of armor called the Golden Coat of the Hawk. The hawk is an important symbol in Nordic life, and the hawk is a respected beast even in the giants' minds. He chose a hawk for his symbol because he knew that he no longer walked the mammoth's path anyway. The only thing he needed to think about now was how to gain freedom for the giants. He traveled to Stone Chill Bluff, a land still inhabited by his kinsmen, and was welcomed as a hero by the locals. He looked to them, and told them that they can't keep staying in their camps, making cheese and catching skeevers. It was time to forge a kingdom. A kingdom was not something these giants really understood, but Ysgramor explained it as creating a new home and putting the smaller people in their places. They all cheered, ready to get behind Ysgramor and his new giant kingdom. Before declaring war on Shorvar II and by extension the Nordic people, he first asked the king to host one last tournament. Ysgramor wants to give these Nords one final show before he makes them regret ever looking down on him. Naturally, Shorvar chose two events that he assumed Ysgramor could never find success in: an archery competition and a horse race. Can Ysgramor even mount a horse? The king laughed at the very idea. When it comes to archery though, Ysgramor did need to use a slightly larger bow than the other competitors on account of his size, but he'd proved to his own camp ages ago that he can hit a tiny little apple with a regular sized arrow. He took the bow, more gruff than usual, and fired every arrow he had perfectly into the target set out for him. Now comes the horse race. Ysgramor could not find a horse which he could mount, so he instead brought in one of his own. A mammoth entered the racetrack, and Ysgramor climbed onto it. Again, the Nords laughed, believing a mammoth could never outpace a horse. Ysgramor knew that the power and strength of the mammoth would prove them all wrong. At first, the horses and their riders raced past Ysgramor, but with each step did his mammoth gain momentum, and with that momentum did he gain speed and power. Each step shook the ground so much that the viewers fell from their seats. Once Ysgramor hit max speed, the other racers fell from their horses with all the shaking, and in some cases, the horses themselves fell over, unable to keep their balance. Ysgramor won the race, albeit in an unorthodox way, and no one was laughing now. The giant exited the tournament sullenly, taking his money and prizes to return to Stonechill Bluff and begin his insurrection. He declared a new giant kingdom and made war against the High King of Eastern Skyrim, Torbjorn, and thousands of giants joined Ysgramor's rebellion. Ysgramor took his daughter, Shenya, with him to battle. Even as a 3-year-old toddler, she was about as large as most of the Nords, and she'd be getting some first-hand experience fighting them off. After occupying much of Heljarchen, Ysgramor took the fight right to the High King, having not just the advantage of size, but also numbers. The thousands of giants obliterated the High King's forces at Dim Hollow. Soon after, the High King granted Ysgramor the land between Stonehill and Sheerpoint, perhaps hoping these giants could be a wall between himself and Whiterun. Of course, he had no idea that Ysgramor would not have his ambition sated by a mere mountain valley. Nonetheless, it was a great day. This is no kingdom, that's for sure, but it's a land the giants can truly call home with no fear. There's a complicating factor though. Much of this land is still inhabited by Nords. What should be done with them? Ysgramor wondered. This giant, Ysgramor, had taken his name, Ysgramor Thiefcatcher, in the hopes of appealing to the Nords. He knew that Ysgramor, the historical figure, in reality was a ruthless, brutal conqueror. He was a man famous for slaying the hardy frost giants, although he's more famous for his slaughtering of the snow elves. But the giants remember. The Nords love Ysgramor for his bravery, but they forget his violence. It's time that they remember. Every Nord in his domain will face total seizure of their property and violent suppression until they leave. There will be no laws to protect the lives of the Nords, nor any non-giant people that may have once called this land home. To facilitate this, Ysgramor reformed the giant army, turning a ragtag collection of companions into a machine of violence. Any giants dedicated to the pacifist ways of the Mammoth's path may complain, and Ysgramor wouldn't dare lift a finger against his own people, but their complaints will fall on deaf ears. They have no army. They have no kingdom. In case you think Ysgramor has turned into some kind of mindless brute though, you'd be quite wrong. He's bitter, but he's still dedicated to the work of making giants a legitimized people in the eyes of others. That's why he attacked the High King of Western Skyrim, Fraki. The king there is much more powerful than Torbjorn of Eastern Skyrim. Nonetheless, the war is over just the one county of Skyborn. There's something more important at stake here. Ysgramor, as expected, demolished the High King's army and sent in his demands, which the High King had no choice but to obey. He did, however, include one extra thing: a hostage. The High King's court gasped in horror. To send a royal prince to live among the savage giants. Ysgramor made a promise though. He will take Prince Gisser under his wing and raise him to adulthood, with total protection and peace. The boy will be raised like a son, but he will be raised in the ways of the giants. Ysgramor will show that giant culture and giant way of life is just as valid as any Nord way of life, and he'll do so by bridging the gap between the two. Prince Gisser was surrendered to Ysgramor. Ysgramor then gently picked up the baby and brought him to Heljarchen, before declaring war on Shorvar of Whiterun, intending to conquer Dragon's Reach and its surroundings. The city held out for some time, but it didn't last against the Mammoths and their ferocity. Ysgramor distributed the land to giant lords, his vassals, and ordered them to expel all Nords, no matter their whining. They would comply. From here, the legend goes that Ysgramor made nearly a perpetual war, controlling most of Whiterun Hold by 478. He He then declared war on Igna, the new queen of Whiterun, looking to claim her kingdom for himself. The queen was captured in less than a year, and her crown given to Ysgramor. The Giant King first fought off a handful of invaders that had been at war with Igna previously, and then he continued his war, revoking everything from the Nords that he could. This tyranny would mark him as a truly reviled ruler here, but it was necessary to ensure the Giants would have a long-lasting true home. After securing the land for his kin, Ysgramor renamed the Kingdom of Whiterun to better reflect his legend. He is Ysgramor, the new king of this land, and this is his new Atmora. The name stuck, and will be used by Nords and Giants alike. As king of New Atmora, Ysgramor demanded respect for his culture and cast off his pariah status. He dropped his old epithet, the Jolly, and embraced the last pariah. He had a special sympathy for the likes of orcs and goblins, fellow pariahs of his, and so he vowed to accept at least some of those folks, here and there. Ysgramor's 100th birthday was marked by these achievements. Many of his people looked to him, wondering if he had any greater plans. The Giants have a kingdom, and it will soon be settled by them, and their kingship was recognized by the rest of Skyrim. But alas, he had far greater plans for this kingdom of giants. Whiterun is not enough. It certainly wouldn't have been enough for Ysgramor or his 500 companions. If there's any piece of giant culture that has thrived under Ysgramor, then it's definitely the tradition of storytelling. Whether recounting tales of Ysgramor's battles against the Nords, or his work to protect the people from bandits, everything gets a little exaggerated here and there, and that's part of the fun. Proper giants of course know this, and they understand that Ysgramor himself is essentially just like any one of them. Gisr, the son of High King Fraki, isn't quite aware of these nuances of storytelling though, and as the tale of Ysgramor's war against the High King was told and retold, it would give the boy a false impression that he was in fact actually Ysgramor's son. Naturally, Ysgramor corrected the boy, telling him that he's his uncle in the sense of a respected elder. It was with this revelation that Gisr really started to understand the Tundra Strider culture, and even the other giants started to see him as one of them, although they'd have to crane their necks downwards to see him at all. After this coronation, Ysgramor raised a standing stone in Whiterun, commemorating his crowning as king, and then also founded a holy order in Mizark. There, adherents of the Mammoth's path would train and prepare for the coming wars against all of Skyrim. The order was named the Tundra Tusks, in reference to their sacred mammoths, of course. In Sun's Dawn of 483, the Nords rose up in rebellion against their oppressors, and their bravery is of course admirable, but the upstart rebel, Eris, only gave Ysgramor more justification to continue displacing the Nords, whose numbers were slowly dwindling across the kingdom. After putting the rebels down, Ysgramor feasted yet again. He'd gotten into the habit of feasting, if only because he had all this money and very little to spend it on. He liked having money, and made him feel powerful. In the autumn of 485, Ysgramor was approached by a mysterious man calling himself Sam Gweven. The two had a drinking competition, and Ysgramor won, of course. What he didn't know was that Sam Gweven was actually the Daedric Lord Sanguin, and upon winning, Sanguin offered Ysgramor a reward. He could become dashingly beautiful or obtain yet more riches. In his drunken stupor, Ysgramor asked for even more money, but Sanguin cursed him with an eternal hunger for more and more money. Ysgramor's greed was unsightly by this point to many of his fellow giants, but who could question him? The king even went as far as to end the tradition of the moot here in New Atmora, telling his companions that only he and his lineage will likely ever be worthy of ruling here. Meanwhile, Gisr approached Ysgramor, ready to celebrate his 16th birthday. The birthday where he'd return to his home in solitude. Rather than that though, Ysgramor could let him go. The boy is his now, Ysgramor's greed commanding him more so than any kind of fatherly love. Gisr Cursebraid adopted the name Thiefcatcher and became Ysgramor's adopted son, much to the dismay of the western Skyrim court. Ysgramor got a wife for Gisr, having him married off to the sister of his former father. Is this inbreeding? Yes, that's the point, as Ysgramor is looking to inflict even further pain upon the Western High King. Of course, he's clearly lost sight of his goal to improve the giant cultural perception in Skyrim. Now he's not just a conqueror, a tyrant, and a kidnapper, but also an inbreeder. What does Ysgramor need the approval of any people except his own anyway, though? He fought a few more wars to consolidate New Atmora, finally ruling all of its proper territory in Second Seed of 491. The Nord kings and Jarls were praying that this would be the end of his ambitions, and the foolish High Kings from Windhelm and Solitude were even thinking that they could convince Ysgramor to take one of their sides against the other. He instead focused his conquests south and east, attacking Falkrenth and the Rift. Meanwhile, Winterhold had broken free from eastern Skyrim, and as such, Skyrim is fractured into 5 major players. High King Fraki Cursebraid of Western Skyrim, King Grom Cruel Sea the Spear of Winterhold, High Queen Freydis II Flamehair of Eastern Skyrim, and finally, King Toviatar Bjorga of the Rift. There are various holdouts of independence in Skyrim still, like the Orcs of Falkranth and the Reachmen of Sungard, but their time as free people will likely end soon. As part of the balance of power, Ysgramor has gotten his daughter, Shenya, married to a prince of Winterhold, Einarth. Intermarriage between Nords and Giants was a bit unsavory to both sides, but again, it was a great pride to Ysgramor to incorporate Nord people into his way of life. Einarth Cruel Sea will be his son-in-law, if only to stick it to the Nords. As a new realm of former pariahs, refugees of various places across Tamriel started to arrive in New Atmora, thinking perhaps they could find a home there. The Kothringi servants of the Ideal Masters arrived in the beginning of 498, and of course, Ysgramor would say no to all these refugees, in some cases even confiscating their wealth for daring to encroach upon this kingdom for giants. Speaking of which, by First Seed of 504, the giants have indeed made much of what was once called Whiterun into their homes. The old Nord homes in the prairies of New Atmora have been demolished, and in their place, huge campfires and mammoth grazing grounds have been established. The city of Whiterun itself has been allowed to stand, but it's something of a museum now instead. The local giants love to visit the city and see their success shown to them in the form of an abandoned town. The Palace of Dragon's Reach is the jewel of that conquest. Nobody could possibly defeat Ysgramor as he fought further and further out from Whiterun, but he found himself instead challenged by an outsider. South of Falkreath, Queen Justa of Chorrol, a Cyrodiilic follower of the One God. Ysgramor didn't know much about these old Alessian peoples and their monkey prophet, but he knew that this queen wanted to harm the giants, and so he fought against her and her invasion of Falkreath. He first dealt with his other war in the Reach before returning to Riverwood to see that Justa had occupied much of the hold. He was confident nonetheless that his giants would make short work of the little people, and yet she brought with her army something that Ysgramor had no experience seeing on the battlefield. She brought Colovian cavalry, famous for their speed and ferocity. Ysgramor's giants were handed their first real defeat on the field at the hands of these nimble horsemen. Thankfully, the land that Justa took was not yet inhabited by giants, so its loss was of little meaning, but it was a shameful moment in Ysgramor's legend. The ancient Ysgramor of Atmora didn't win every battle he fought either, and he once even returned to Atmora before triumphantly reclaiming Skyrim, so one loss won't mean the end of Ysgramor Thiefcatcher's rule. In fact, Ysgramor's loss really helped to humanize, or rather giantize, I guess, him as a character. His legend, like that of the other Ysgramor, is multifaceted and ever-evolving. When Ysgramor lost, he didn't cry about it or give up. He instead grew to respect his adversary and vowed to defeat her later. It was another story in the legend, and all these stories and legends of the wandering hero Ysgramor have led to the Tundra Strider culture's embrace of a certain social code, a sort of chivalry if you will. A social code for the giants will develop over the coming decades and define them as a people interested in doing what's right and respecting those that respect them back. Justa took Ysgramor seriously and fought him as an equal, outwitting him properly with her cavalry. She held far more respect among the giants than any Nord ever could. To train for the eventual fight against Justa, Ysgramor hosted a tournament at Jorvaskr. He'd participate of course, but he's hoping that his own soldiers can learn something from the competition whether they win or lose. Ysgramor wiped the floor with his opponents, and they all had a great time. In the finals of the dueling competition, he went up against his own daughter, Shenya, and the two were happy to have some time together. Being a king is hard work. While dueling, a little bit of Ysgramor's youthful, innocent soul came to surface again. He made a light-hearted joke at his daughter, saying he'd slept with her mom, a common dig in giant culture. Of course, it was only an insult to sleep with someone's mom if you weren't their dad. And naturally, Ysgramor slept with Shenya's mom. He is her dad. The two laughed, as did the crowd watching. In that laughter, Ysgramor took the advantage and won the duel, with no hard feelings of course. Shenya might be able to defeat her father in the upcoming wrestling match instead. This moment mattered to the Giant King because he started to think about maybe forgiving the Nords. His people have plenty of land now, and the Nords have certainly paid the price for their mistreatment of him and the Giants. It could be a nice time to retire. He put those thoughts aside for now, ready to wrestle. He once again found himself in the finals with his beloved daughter, who he again defeated. It was so wonderful to see all of his giant friends smiling. He decided he'd be a gentler giant from here on. He went on a hunt along the White River, using his great martial ability for something more wholesome than ripping heads from necks. What a joy it was to be in nature. His armies did occasionally fend off some Nords and take over some land here and there, but Ysgramor stopped immediately revoking territory from the Nords and forcing their people to leave. He felt that they could coexist in the kingdom with him, so long as they remained loyal, of course, and, of course, every Nord lord did profess their undying loyalty in fear of their new king's dreadful reputation. Before you think the sun is setting on this happily ever after story though, we have to remember that Ysgramor is an emotional man, and one just as easily swayed to violence as he is to peace. In Sun's Dawn of 519, Shenya sent word that her husband, Einarth Cruel-Sea, had been abusing her and treating her terribly. That marriage, which Ysgramor created to bring shame to the Nords, had resulted in his own daughter's secret unhappiness. She neglected to tell him of her sorrow in that marriage for so long, only because she worried it would compromise her father's plans. He did stop to think for a moment about how a little man like Einarth could ever really harm Shenya the giant, but it made sense. Einarth could do whatever he wanted to her, and if she ever fought back, she'd probably bring his life to a sudden and gruesome end. She'd be accused of murder and forever shunned by both Nordic and giant society. Einarth knew that, and used it to his advantage. Naturally, Ysgramor brought Shenya back home, got her a divorce, and decided that the Nords do not deserve any forgiveness if, even after all this, they'd still have the gall to act how they do. Ysgramor swore that Skyrim would not just be united, but cleansed of these barbarous Nords. The giant code of conduct, their chivalrous way of life, could not tolerate wife-beaters and warmongers. Ysgramor set his sights firstly on Justa of Chorrol though. She's continuing to expand into Skyrim by simply going around New Atmora, and if she gets too powerful she could become a very scary threat. At the Battle of Morgate, Ysgramor learned from his previous failures against the Colovian cavalry and won the war, reclaiming Falkreath. Of course, he revoked all the land from the local men to replace them with giants. He continued his campaign, invading more of eastern Skyrim in 526, and especially enjoying the invasion of Winterhold, still ruled by the Cruel-Sea family and their horrid men. While fighting off in the frozen coast, he came across Sam Gwyven again from that drinking contest all those years ago. Sam said nothing, but handed Ysgramor the Sanguine Rose, a thorny staff with great magic powers. Ysgramor was happy to use this power on his enemies, and he opened a portal to Oblivion which spat out a Dremora for him to command. This is Moath, a creature from Oblivion sworn to Ysgramor's service, and you wouldn't think it possible, but the two immediately got along great. Moath respects power, which Ysgramor has of course, and Ysgramor likes getting respect. It's a match made in heaven. Ysgramor gave Moath the role of Sanguine's champion, an accolade centered on sportsmanship and tactics. Sanguine's champion of course should revel in the joy of anything, up to and including combat itself, and that's exactly what Moath does. Once again though, it popped into Ysgramor's mind that working with Daedra to destroy the Nords might not reflect well on him or his people, but that thought was quickly buried by the desire for vengeance for his daughter. As Ysgramor's campaign continued, the High Kings and Queens of Skyrim lost control over their own Jarls, and by mid-year of 535, Skyrim was dominated by New Atmora. Soon, Ysgramor will be able to crown himself the High King of all Skyrim. In terms of that whole eradication of Nords thing that Ysgramor is going for, it's been quite successful, I should add. In First Seed of 540, the vast majority of Skyrim's most fertile and prosperous land is inhabited solely by giants, with only a sparse few minorities here and there. In mid-year 546, Ysgramor's siege of Windhelm was symbolic of his total victory in the conflict. His giants destroyed the ancient city, built by the original Ysgramor himself, and King Grom Cruel-Sea, Einarth's disgusting cousin, was executed. The Cruel-Sea family will know no peace. By Morningstar of 561, Skyrim is nearly united, with both of its high kingdoms having completely collapsed, and Ysgramor became unfathomably wealthy in the process. At the same time, Tamriel is suffering with the Knahaten flu from Blackmarsh, which threatens to make its way to Skyrim. A wise king would hold off on moving troops around areas with the plague, lest it move into his own kingdom, but Ysgramor is even wiser. He knows that the frigid cold of Skyrim will keep sickness away from his hardy giants, who themselves are too great to be affected by a cough and a sneeze. He continued his campaign, even as the flu arrived in Skyrim's ports. After conquering the mountains of Kilcreath and some land in Sarthal, Ysgramor ruled enough of both ends of Skyrim to finally call himself High King. He first declared himself the High King of Western Skyrim in mid-year of 567. However, to claim the unification of Skyrim, he'd need just a little bit more land off in the east. He held a great coronation in Whiterun, and then conquered the city of Winterhold from the Cruel-Sea family, the conquest of which gave him enough control over the east to finally, truly unite Skyrim. On the 18th of Morning Start, Second Era 570, did Ysgramor Thiefcatcher unite Skyrim. He renamed the High Kingdom of Skyrim to Ysgramora to communicate that this is a new era for Skyrim, an era of giants. Ysgramor succeeded in creating a world where giants were respected, and the legends won't tell of his once naive intention to simply live as an equal among the Nords. No, the High Kingdom of Ysgramor is a land of and for giants, where giants are respected not as equals, but as superiors. The Mammoth's path was and still is one of peace, but Ysgramor's work may have loosened that perception at least a little bit. Some say that by subjugating all of Skyrim like this, he's brought more peace than any random giant in a camp eating cheese could have, but the truth is, Ysgramor stopped believing in peace when the Nords laughed at him for all the things they should have applauded him for. They've paid the price, and now Ysgramor will enjoy peace, prosperity, and a society built on the chivalrous giant way of life. Can a high kingdom run by giants last? Will the other peoples of Tamriel recognize the giants as equals, or will their reputation be marred by their onslaught against the Nords? It's hard to say, but what's safe to say is that Ysgramor Thiefcatcher will forever be celebrated in the poetry and songs of the Tundra Striders, and forever reviled by the Skalds of Skyrim. Thank you for your time.